down to Acapulco. I know I'm headed down to Acapulco.
Thank you. Hi guys. First, I just want to say thank you for having me because this has been the coolest political event I've ever been to. Everyone's been so friendly and so cool and just great energy. I'm sure you guys can all feel it too. So I want to get started, if you guys will oblige, and if you're interested. I wanted to start with a little breathing exercise. So it's very common in yoga. A lot of teachers use it. So if you could all close your eyes. You don't have to participate, but if you could close your eyes just so I don't make like awkward eye contact with you and get all weirded out. And for now, just see if you can start to focus your breath on your nostrils, breathing through your nose. And if you have any sinus issues, no worries, breathe through your mouth, no pressure. But see if you can just start to notice the oxygen coming in through your nose and feel it brushing across the back of your throat and feel it coming all the way to the base of your lungs, filling up your belly and feeling your stomach expand. And then see if you can exhale out nice and smoothly at about the same pace that you inhaled. And see if you can just bring your attention to that inward and outward flow of breath. So just keep doing that. And in a few moments, we'll start the breathing exercise. So I'll let you know what it is. I'll guide, and you guys will just inhale for a count of 5. You'll pause at the top, exhale for a count of 5, and pause at the bottom. And we'll just do that a few times. So just take a couple more deep inhales and exhales. Nice and slow. And wherever you are, just exhale out whatever breath is left in your lungs. And we'll begin. So inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold at the top for a couple moments. And exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And pause. Inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and pause. Exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause again. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pause. Exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll do one more round. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause. Then take a deep inhale through your nose and exhale it out the mouth. Open your eyes. So I have a question for you guys. How many of you at any point or even right now have been frustrated or angry or resentful or bitter towards the government or status or people who just don't care at all? Raise your hand. I'm definitely one of them. Right, okay, me too, exactly. And it would be weird if you weren't, so I'm with you on that. But what I found is, well, first I'd like to give you a quote from Patanjali, who was an ancient yogic philosopher. And he basically wrote an ancient guide to what yoga meant. It was called the Yoga Sutras. And this is one of the things he said. When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations, your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And this is a quote about yoga and meditation and consciousness, but I found it could be very easily applied to our freedom movement and what happens when we sort of break free of the bonds of statist ideology and propaganda and we start being free for ourselves. And this is all very beautiful, and I absolutely love it. I'm passionate about it. Yoga and fighting for freedom are my two greatest passions, but I found that over the years, as much as I understand the message of freedom and I believe in it and I try to practice it, it's a little bit harder to actually have freedom within myself. And that's always been the struggle. There's a gap between that belief in the philosophy and actually living it. And what I found is that yoga really helps me bridge that gap. And before I get into how yoga and freedom or anarchy are very similar, first I just want to give a background on what yoga is. Because a lot of people aren't quite sure. They think it's just exercise or a workout. They've heard about hot yoga and it's all about sweating. But what yoga essentially is, it is a physical practice called the asana. Those are the physical postures. But those postures were actually developed because in ancient times, monks would sit around and they would meditate for hours on end. And their bodies would get strained and they would be sore. And so in order to keep meditating, they devised all of these postures, and that's where the physical practice came from. And what yoga essentially means is union. So it's the union of body and breath. And when you focus on your breath and you feel it in your body, it's pretty effective at taking away your focus on anything else. So it sort of minimizes distraction, and it, in a way, liberates your mind because your mind isn't wandering around. I don't know if you can tell, I'm a very neurotic, compulsive person, so yoga is very good for me and it's very helpful. But what yoga has really done for me is, as far as I became a yoga teacher. That's how much I love it. And when I learned about the philosophy, it really clicked for me because so much of the most important foundations of yoga really came down to the same principles we espouse as people who care about freedom. And I want to get into those philosophies, but before I do that, I just want to go over some of the topical similarities because there's a lot in common. And the first thing is that both yoga and freedom are tragically misunderstood. So we've talked about, okay, people think yoga is a physical practice. That's not really the case. But in a lot of ways, as a yoga teacher, it's a little frustrating because the top things people say to me is, well, I'm not flexible, so yoga's not for me. And they say, I'm too neurotic, my mind's too impatient, I can't sit and focus on my breath. To which I say, that's a sign you really need yoga. Yoga will help you be more flexible. Yoga will help you quiet that mind. And so really the thing that they're afraid of is actually the solution. And similarly, when people think about freedom, it's often misunderstood. Some people think that freedom means free college education. And other people think that freedom means bombing a bunch of people on the other side of the world so they can feel secure, and that that's freedom. And in reality, both of these problems could be solved by freedom. The price of college would probably be cheaper if we had freedom, and we probably wouldn't be killing as many people if we had freedom. But in reality, for both yoga and freedom, if we truly understood them, I think we'd all be a lot more liberated and probably a lot happier. The second similarity is that neither yoga or freedom are a utopia. And there's sort of this, I could get up here and I could say that every time I get on my yoga mat, I just connect with the divine and I'm immediately free and my mind quiets and I'm liberated at once. And I'd be lying to you. That's not true. Because I can get on my yoga mat and some days I cannot quiet my mind to save my soul. I couldn't even go to yoga after the Paris terrorist attacks because it was just too much to deal with. And in the same regard, a lot of people, hold on, let me back up here, sorry. Here we go. This is why I need yoga, you guys. At the same time, freedom is not a utopia. So in yoga, for example, we can say that I injured my wrist last year. I could have quit yoga. I could have said, never mind, I can't do this. It hurt my wrist, I can't do it. I was doing arm balances. I was trying to get more advanced. I could have abandoned my practice because something bad happened. But I understood that the benefits of yoga far outweighed that little cost, whether it was not always having a quiet mind when I finished my practice or injuring my wrist. And in the same vein, bad things happen when we have freedom. There will still be violence. There will still be disputes. Businesses will fail. But I don't think any of us would throw out the entire philosophy just because there's freedom for failure. So in that regard, yoga and freedom are also very similar. And in the third way, they are very similar because they both espouse individualism and self-responsibility. And I think a lot of people think of yoga as being like a very liberal habit, and everybody in Los Angeles and Santa Monica does yoga, and they all support Bernie Sanders. And I won't say that's not true, but I'll get to that later. We'll talk about that later. But essentially, when it comes down to individualism, I want to use an example that's actually a pet peeve of mine in the yoga community, but it really represents the power of individuality in this philosophy. So in yogic teaching and in Los Angeles, where I do a lot of yoga, teachers will often say that we're too powerless to change the world. We don't have that capability. We can't stop war. We can't stop oppression. So all we can do is go inward and focus on ourselves. We can make ourselves happier. We can liberate ourselves. And by doing that, we can change the world by interacting with others and by spreading that positivity or that peace. And I totally agree with it, but it's sort of a pet peeve of mine because a lot of people who do yoga use that to ignore politics, to ignore what's going on in the world. And then they pop up every 4 years and they decide they have a progressive liberal candidate they love, and all of a sudden they're experts and they think they're going to change the world that way. So that's a little tough for me, but I do think it exemplifies the importance of individuality in yoga. That's what it all comes down to. It all comes down to the self. And when you're on your yoga mat, anyone who's into yoga will tell you that the point isn't to look around at what everybody else is doing and to compare yourself. It's to go inward and to really stay on your mat and in your body. That's the power of individualism in yoga. And I don't need to explain to you the power of individualism in freedom. I think you guys are all clear on that. But I just want to share a story of self-responsibility that I learned as a lesson through yoga, because When I first started doing yoga, I really connected with it. It took a few tries, but when I went to a certain class, when I really needed it, I walked out just feeling like I was on drugs. And I was totally sober. I was just high on yoga. But as I kept going, I found some of my old habits were returning, and I found myself getting very irritable in class. And I'll give you some examples. So I would go 20 minutes early to get my spot at the front left side of the room. That's my little compulsive spot. I'd show up early, and then with an empty room, another person would walk in and put their mat right next to mine, like this far apart. And I'd look around the room, and nobody else was there, and I couldn't figure out why they had to come right next to me. And I would spend the whole class irritated at this person. And everything they did bothered me, the way they breathed, the way they almost touched me, the way their sweat dropped onto my mat. And I had no peace. I would leave the class more irritated than when I came in. I have some more examples. There are some women in class with certain teachers in Los Angeles, and I don't know what it is, but they get into certain stretches and they just feel compelled to make very orgasmic sexual noises. And I had a lot of trouble with this at first. It was like, oh, you're ruining my practice. Like, you're not having sex. Don't act like you're having sex. And ultimately, these little pet peeves of mine revealed to me that I wasn't truly connecting with my practice. And over the years, I've been doing yoga for 3 years now, I've learned that if I'm irritated by that, that's on me. It's not the other person's fault. They're not personally trying to offend me or invade my space or make me feel like I'm in an orgy. They're doing their own thing. I'm doing mine. And really, it is 100% my responsibility. If I walk out of that class not having a good session, it's on me. Even if it's a bad teacher, it's on me. Because if I can't find peace in my breath and I can't find peace in my body, that's my own fault. Much like freedom, where we have our own self-responsibility and we need to take responsibility for everything we do and we need to accept the consequences. So we've talked a little bit about how yoga and freedom are similar, but I want to get into the actual philosophy now. And a lot of people, as we've discussed, think that yoga is just the physical practice called the asana, and there are actually 8 limbs of yoga. Asana is one of them, but there are 7 other ones, and the ultimate goal is liberation, or in yoga, connection with the divine and moving past the self. And I won't have time to talk about all 8, but I'll go through them just very briefly before I get into the first one, which I think is the most foundational. So the first are universal moral codes, and they're called the yamas. And the second limb are the niyamas, which is how we treat ourselves. The third are the asanas. The fourth are pranayama, which is an example is how we started doing the breathing exercise. The next is pratyahara, which is retreat from the senses. So there are exercises you can do where you literally just cover your eyes and your nose and your ears, and you use that as a way to go inward. And from that, the resulting consequence is you start to focus. So the next few limbs are about meditation and getting deeper. And the final limb, which is the 8th limb, it's called samadhi, is that ultimate freedom and liberation and connection with the divine. So by acting out all of these steps, we end up with that ultimate liberation. But I want to focus today on the yamas because these are the foundational principles that directly correlate and parallel freedom and anarchy. So we talk a lot about human interaction should be free of force, fraud, and coercion. And these are sort of just the central tenets of everything we believe, because why should we be violent against people? Why should we be dishonest or fraudulent? And why would we coerce them? So if you look at the yamas, which is the first limb of yoga, I want to refer to BKS Iyengar. And there's actually a style of yoga named after him. It's Iyengar Yoga. And he's sort of the modern Patanjali in a way. I'm sure some yoga scholar would totally just shred me for saying that. But he did the same thing that Patanjali did, which was just define yoga and the meaning and the practice. And this principle, it's nonviolence. It's called ahimsa. And it means, or BKS Iyengar described it, or discussed it. He said, violence arises out of fear, weakness, ignorance, or restlessness. To curb it, what is needed most is a change of outlook on life and reorientation of the mind. Violence is bound to decline when men learn to base their faith upon reality and investigation rather than upon ignorance and supposition. And to me, that sounds a lot like what we talk about when we discuss status and how their violence comes from fear or it comes from insecurity. And to me, they totally align. And I want to point out really quickly that when I was doing my teacher training, I had to ask about self-defense because I needed to know if that was allowed in the yogic philosophy. And my teacher said that that was permissible, so I'll take that. And I'm sure there is a debate in the yoga community. I'm sure many people who spend a lot of time doing yoga would be absolutely opposed to defending yourself in any way, but there's obviously room for discussion, and so I think that's very valuable. But this use of force even comes down to the physical practice. If you're ever in Los Angeles, I highly recommend you go to a studio called Power Yoga in Santa Monica. And there's a teacher named Brian Kest. And some of the people in this room have gone to him, so they know what I'm talking about, but he's very irreverent. You know, he doesn't even use the Sanskrit names for postures, talks about smoking weed, he cusses, you know, he just, anything you could possibly expect. You'll laugh through class, you'll sweat. But one of the things he says is that any idiot can jam themselves into a yoga pose. It doesn't mean it's right. And he always reminds people, he'll literally say, think of a situation where force is superior to persuasion. And it just makes so much sense because this is what we believe as people who believe in freedom and peace. So that's one thing that's very similar, but the second yama is called satya, and it means truth. And to me, this aligns with the idea of not being fraudulent. And it applies in a couple of ways because in one sense, it applies to everyone in this room who has sought truth, because at one point or another, unless you were born an anarchist, and I know some of you are really awesome and you were, and you just never submitted to authority, but that wasn't me, that wasn't a lot of us. But we all ended up in this room because we started to see through the cracks in narratives, and we started to see that there were holes in the propaganda. And we started seeking real objective truth. We started seeking knowledge and how the world really works. So that's one sense of truth. But there's another sense of truth, which is that we're honest in our interactions with each other. We're not fraudulent. And so that comes down to fraud. Human interaction should be free of fraud. And Iyengar says, if the mind thinks thoughts of truth, if the tongue speaks words of truth, then one becomes fit for union with the infinite. And for me, infinite means freedom. So that's a pretty simple one. And then the third is called Astreya, and it means non-stealing, which for me corresponds to coercion. And Iyengar says, the desire to possess and enjoy what another has drives a person to do evil deeds. From this desire springs the urge to steal and the urge to covet, which to me sounds a lot like some statists who believe in big government. I will not elaborate or name names, but I think we can all think of people who believe it is their right to the fruits of other people's labor, and essentially what Iyengar and the yoga philosophy says is that that's not okay. And while these things are very similar to freedom, I do want to add the caveat that they're not an exact parallel. And I would feel very dishonest if I stood up here and told you that yoga and freedom are exactly the same, because they're not. And there's some basic differences I want to point out, and then some others that I think can really enhance our belief in freedom. But for example, when speaking about nonviolence, Iyengar says that vegetarianism should be just the baseline for people who do yoga. And I'm not a vegetarian. I kind of want to be. I'm working on it. People have discussed it. So that's one thing that's different. I know a lot of people here that's not really their thing, and that's fine. And another thing I don't think will be very popular with this crowd is the concept of non-hoarding. So that is the fifth yama in the first limb of yoga. And it essentially means don't take more than what you need. And I would never say that that's what you have to do. I don't think that that's necessary to enjoy yoga or to live a peaceful life. I do think that maybe we could learn from it because it would be nice to share with others. And I think if we really want a free and voluntary world, that kind of generosity is necessary, but that's another difference. If we get into the second limb of yoga called the niyamas, which is how we treat ourselves, here's one I don't think will be very popular: abstinence. Iyengar says that if you, as a male, withhold your sperm, you will hold on to more of your life force. I can't get with that, but he also says this does not mean that the philosophy of yoga is only for celibates. So there's some wiggle room. You don't have to really adhere to that. Another example is the religious undertone of yoga, because obviously it's rooted in Hinduism, and a lot of the poses, the physical postures, are rooted in mythology of ancient characters. And that never really spoke to me. It was never something that I felt compelled to look more into. It could be for some people, but that's just another difference. And then another one is contentment. I think contentment is actually really not a bad thing, to be grateful for what we have. One of the meditations I do is trying to one actually I got from Brian Kest, is to just think of all the things we have in our lives to be grateful for, and why we're actually so rich as we already are that we don't need to seek more. And of course, we all seek more, and that's fine, but I think contentment is a really valuable virtue to espouse, whether in freedom or in yoga. But the ones I really think can improve upon libertarian philosophy, I don't mean edit the nap, I don't mean change, I guess not improve upon libertarian philosophy, but improve upon our lives as people who believe in it, are qualities of compassion and kindness and love. And you can be a libertarian brutalist, good for you. You're funny. You have the freedom to say whatever you want. But to be honest, if we're working for a free world, and this is what we're all fighting for, I personally don't want to put in all that effort so we can all be assholes to each other. I think that if we have a free world, we should be working on love. We should be working on compassion and tolerance and kindness. And for example, as Iyengar said when he was speaking about nonviolence, he said it is more than a negative command not to kill, for it has a wider positive meaning, love. He also said the yogi opposes evil in the wrongdoer, but not the wrongdoer, which really amounts to compassion and forgiveness. And If you don't want to forgive the evil statists and you don't want to forgive the sociopathic politicians, that's fine. I totally get it. They're evil, crazy people. But I would say that maybe just for your own individual well-being, it might be nice to not harbor those negative emotions. So these are all things I think we don't need to change libertarianism, but I think for our own individual well-being, it might be worth looking into and considering. So we've gone over the philosophy, we've gone over how they're similar, but why should you do yoga? I can tell you all the reasons in the world. I can explain to you that they're very similar and that the ideologies really complement each other, or I can give you some practical reasons, and I'd like to. So the first is self-ownership. That's sort of one of the most foundational concepts of freedom. We own our bodies, we decide what goes in them, we decide how we use them. And for me, I mean, if you want to not exercise and eat unhealthy, that's totally your choice. I don't judge you. Do whatever you want. But as far as I'm concerned, if I'm on this planet and I'm in this body and I'm having this beautiful human experience, I want to take care of it. And yoga is so good for all of those things. Yoga is good for releasing tension in the body. It's great for digestion. It's great for injuries. I mean, the list of physical benefits that come with doing yoga it's essentially endless, and you can Google it, you can look into it, but it's also about self-ownership of the mind, because if we can't control the thoughts and habits that are going on in our mind, I know that I personally wouldn't be free. And it's an ongoing battle, it requires maintenance. I would never get up here and say that I have figured it all out and that yoga solved all my problems, because it doesn't, but neither does freedom. Here's another fun reason that you should do yoga, and I think a lot of the yoga community would be really mad at me for saying this, but support the free market. I think the yoga community and the yoga industry is one of the most voluntary, best examples of free market capitalism there is. Free market doesn't have to mean an evil corporation exploiting poor people. That's not how it works. There are a lot of other examples, and yoga is a great one. Yoga is not regulated by the government at all. It's regulated by a private organization called the Yoga Alliance. They issue the teaching licenses, they set the standards, so it's all voluntary. I was told during my teacher training that in Los Angeles there are more yoga studios than Starbucks, which to me speaks to the high demand for seeking consciousness and for seeking health. And that's just another example of the free market at work. And the best example I can come up with yoga being a free market example is that there are so many different styles of yoga for anything you need. There's Anusara yoga, which is for the spine. There's Kundalini yoga, which is supposed to access the energy that in this theory is in the root of your spine. There's yin yoga for connective tissue. There's restorative yoga if you need a rest. There's vinyasa and power yoga if you want to work out. I mean, the list goes on and on, which really speaks to the beauty of the free market and its ability to accommodate what people need and what people desire. That's another reason. And here's another that I think is really the most important and practical is that you can reach the yoga community. And I would say, based on my experience in Los Angeles, the proportion of people in the yoga community who are receptive to the message of freedom is much higher than in the general population. So if you go to a yoga class and you join that community and you talk to your teacher and you talk to other students, I think you'll find that they will totally get the message of freedom. And don't get me wrong, there will be people who still insist Bernie Sanders is our savior, and there will be people who think Hillary Clinton must be elected because she's a woman. But I've had so many conversations with people who understand force, fraud, and coercion. And I think that if we actually got into the communities and shared that message, we would be able to spread it a lot quicker. And the final reason that you should do yoga is to be the change. And I know that Gandhi was kind of violent and he didn't always line up with his principles, but on this he was right. If we want to see a better world, I think we need to be better. And one of these reasons is just marketing purposes. I think Adam was speaking about it earlier. Who wants to be a part of a movement where everybody's mean and angry and mad and not having a good time? That's not attractive. Why would people want to join us? I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't. But the real reason that we have to be the change is that if we want a world that is peaceful and free and loving, we have to be peaceful and free and loving towards ourselves and towards others. Because in this statist paradigm, we don't have freedom. We're not going to have pure freedom. There's taxation, there's surveillance, there's a police state. We can't have full freedom in the physical world right now in February 2016. But with yoga and with meditation, we can become free in our minds and we can have pure freeness because we're in control of it. We're making that decision ourselves. And as Albert Camus said, we have to be so free that our very existence is an act of rebellion. And that's what yoga has helped me to do. So I just want to give a couple little tips. Okay. All right, we're good. If anybody's interested in doing yoga, I would suggest finding a studio and having a teacher just get their hands on you, because it is possible to injure yourself if you do it at home with some of the more difficult classes, the more active classes. So it would be great if you could learn the form first. And use Yelp. Yelp is your friend. You can find good teachers, good studios. If you're in a situation where there are no yoga studios near you, there are some really great online catalogs. One is udaya.com, and they have instructional videos. The last thing I really want to say is that if yoga's not your thing, I'd suggest maybe trying it again. Just find a different teacher, find a different studio, try a different style. But if you know it's not for you and you just are tired of hearing me talk about it, all I have to say is find something that does make you present and makes you focused and brings you peace. It could be anything. It could be regular meditation. It could be surfing. It could be creating music. The options are limitless. As long as you're cultivating peace within yourself, I'm happy, and I hope that you'll be happy. So I just want to leave you with a quote that's often used to finish yoga classes, so I figured I'd finish my speech with it, because I think it really aligns yoga and freedom. And the saying is, may all beings everywhere be happy and free, and may the thoughts, words, and actions of my life contribute in some way to that happiness and freedom. Namaste. Thank you, guys.
Are you with me?
By the 21st century, the statists had taken over the world. After 9/11, the savage union of the war on terror and the war on drugs squelched the last flickers of freedom. Central banking-backed wars raged. Violence, imprisonment, and theft had become the norm. Not many could see any other way. Hope vanished. But then, when things looked their darkest, something happened. A surprise, and just in time. From the valleys, fjords, and suburbs rose the anarchists. From the cities, factories, and the dark web came the anarcho-capitalists. And from every other nook, corner, cranny, and drum circle, the voluntarists. Some said it was too little, too late. The war had already been lost. You can't change the system, they cried. And the anarchists answered, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. One rule to heal the world, one rule that binds them, one rule sets their moral compass and aligns them. The N-A motherfucking P. And with that, they gather again, as they do every year, in Acapulco, Mexico, this coming February for the 3rd annual Anarchapulco. Speakers include Larkin Rose, Jeffrey Tucker, Jeff Berwick, Adam Kokesh, Milo Yiannopoulos, Lauren Southern, Luke Radowski, Julia Toriansky, Roger Ver, Rick Falkfinger, Dana Martin, Judd Weiss, Max Egan, Josie Wales, That Guy T, Anarchy Girl, Sasha Daygame, Barry Cooper, Mark Victor, Trace Mayer, Ian Freeman and Mark Edge, Rosalind Ross, Tim Moen, Dan Dix, Dale Brown, Christopher David, Stephanie Murphy, Derek J. Freeman, Derek Brose, and many, many more. The headline musical act will be Eric July and Backwards. In and around the event will also be the Dollar Vigilantes Internationalization and Investment Summit, Change Media University, and the world's largest ayahuasca ceremony held by Barry Cooper, Ayahuascapulco. Plus, Terry Brock's Fund Your Freedom entrepreneurial course, Adam Kokesh's homesteading workshop, Sasha Daygame's Anarchy in Relationships course, Dana Martin's Free Your Family workshop, and much, much more. And it will all be held the last week of February 2017 in Acapulco, Mexico at the 5-star Mundo Imperial Resort and Convention Center. Go to anarchapulco.com to stake your place in history. The world might just never be the same. Evacuate the state. Brave the future.